Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital CSEO Forum. I am Pervinder Johar, CEO for Blume Global. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you virtually today. Our topic is end-to-end supply chain orchestration. It's a topic I've been passionate about for many, many years. I think I've been working for over 30 years now. And this topic kind of has been near and dear to my heart for at least kind of 10 years, for the last 10 years or so. Today, we'll start off with a little bit of a background on Blume Global, a company we launched in 2018. Talk about the current challenges and how the slowdown and speed up of COVID-19 has brought them even more into a focus, and then discuss kind of how do we achieve end-to-end supply chain orchestration and what are some of the technology solutions which are available for us. So a little bit on the Blume Global. It's a company, as I mentioned, we launched in 2018. It stands for a blooming, growing organic ecosystem. We ended up choosing the German spelling of the word bloom. That's why it's spelled BLUME. And the focus was on an organic system, ecosystem, and how do we achieve supply chain synchronization kind of across our global supply chains. Our focus has been on delivering a cloud-first intelligent operating platform. The operating platform is a key term as it combines visibility with execution, combines how do we truly operate our supply chains. The way we are building it, kind of it's been a journey for a few years now, is by building what we call Blume Maps, a digital twin of the world's supply chain. It's an ecosystem, and in the ecosystem today we have more than 10,000 companies that participate in the ecosystem. We'll talk more about kind of this notion of location intelligence. The company now has intelligence, or the platform has intelligence on over 1 million locations in supply chain, and has broad connectivity across the globe as we are present now in 133 countries. When we launched Blume, our mission was threefold, and we stay kind of true to our mission. The first part was our fiscal responsibility. The spend on worldwide logistics has already reached $16 trillion. Some estimates are that we're going to get to about $20 trillion of spend on logistics very soon. But this market is fragmented, and we think there are many ways of optimizing our spend on transportation, in particular, logistics broadly, and supply chain as a whole. Our goal has been using a technology platform to enable our customers to take about $1 trillion or more of waste out of the ecosystem. We did many studies back in 2018, and then all of them showed us the fragmentation of our supply chains around the world is inefficient, and we can help take fair amount of waste out of this ecosystem. Our second goal has been on environment. As you know, world supply chains, logistics networks are producers of CO2 emissions today. Our focus was that, similar to the waste from financial perspective, we want to help our customers minimize their CO2 emissions, understand how these CO2 emissions impact their broader supply chains, start off with measuring that how much CO2 emissions are part of kind of any of our customer supply chain. How do you optimize not only for speed, not only for cost, but also for the environment? by using a digital platform like Blume. And our third mission has been on the social side. That some of the largest supply chains on the world rely on some of the smallest businesses in the world. Just as one stat, right? So if you think of the trucking companies, more than 90% of all trucking companies in the world have less than 30 trucks. These are small businesses. These didn't really have the technology which allows them to become digital. So one of our mission has been to give technology in many cases for free to the broad masses of companies that participate in our supply chain ecosystem. It's a model which we call how do we democratize technology, so it's available to all businesses, large and small, because without having the small businesses digital, without having them participate in the ecosystem, we can't really achieve our efficiency goals, either from environment perspective or from fiscal perspective. But more critically, how can you make a supply chain digital if majority of the players, smaller players, are not digital to begin with? And we have done fairly well over the last 3-4 years, and in all three of these aspects, and have worked with many of the companies around the globe in understanding the challenges and enabling a different set of digital processes for supply chain orchestration. If you look at our network, we are in 133 countries today. The goal is to get to somewhere between 160 to 170 countries over the next couple of years. We are connected to all type of ecosystem providers. And so if you look at North America, it means all class 1 railroads, majority of the ocean carriers, almost all of the air cargo providers around the world, and many more stats which are part of our ecosystem. And we'll talk more about how this ecosystem can possibly help with supply chain synchronization and orchestration in a minute. So that's enough about Blume. Let's focus on the challenges that many of our chief supply chain officers are facing today. I was fortunate enough to participate in a round table with a few of the chief supply chain officers about a month back, and then a lot of the messages and challenges seemed consistent across companies, large and small. If I broadly categorize them into three different categories, the first one is, as all of us know, when COVID initially hit, we had worried about demand. We had worried about whether or not the consumer demand and the businesses demand is going to slow down. However, the demand has been robust around the world for many of the goods and services. However, the challenges are on the supply side. And so many of the challenges are on upstream, right? The challenges are around both visibility into the supply and the supply itself. Right? So as many of you know, many of the factories in North America are facing shutdowns either on a temporary basis because of either shortage of the semiconductor parts on high tech, or shortage of labor, or shortage of the components which are moving across the globe. So the lead times have increased. Right? So we have all seen the impact on ocean transportation and air transportation over the last couple of years. The air capacity is tight as the passenger planes stopped flying back in Q2 of 2020, but even at this point, it's not back to the same level it was pre-COVID. We all know about our challenges on congestion both in US for LA Long Beach, but also in China. The Suez Canal incident again highlighted our congestion problems, but broadly, all of it has resulted in longer lead times, and especially longer logistics lead time across the world. We're also seeing the bullwhip effect. Kind of for many years, we've been working on lean kind of models for supply chain, reduce the inventory, make sure that we are as efficient as possible. But once kind of the demand started going up, supply was not there. So there are increased challenges on that. How do you either meet all the demand you have, or how do you balance kind of the limited supply across multiple customer base? And for the first time in a decade, we are again looking at inflationary pressures across the ecosystem. And then some of those inflationary pressures can be passed on to the end consumers or businesses, but many of them have to be absorbed by our supply chains. That's one broad category. If we think of what's been going on in the last 6 months or so. Second one has been supply chain disruptions. And these used to happen kind of once a year. And so I still remember when I was working for a large high-tech company, we were dealing with once a year type of issues on either a volcano in Europe, or a flooding in Thailand, or incidents that happened in Japan with an earthquake, or there was a time when there was a fire at a major memory kind of factories, and these used to happen fairly infrequently. For the last 24 months, they have become the norm. They have become the norm, and they keep on moving throughout the ecosystem, throughout the supply chain. They had started off with some of the tariff wars in 2019, which predates kind of COVID. But during COVID, we saw kind of different type of disruptions show up kind of almost every month. And we continue to live in an environment where more disruptions are very feasible and possible over the next year or two. The challenges we have, there doesn't seem to be any short-term fix. Right? So some of the challenges and disruptions are here to stay. But the way we tackle them, the need for technology, need for visibility is only highlighted, only kind of sharpened in terms of a focus given these disruptions. And the third challenge has been international shipping continues to be complex, continues to be very fragmented, and then the journeys are involve many large companies, but many small companies as well. Net result of it is that kind of supply chain officers around the world kind of now they have a seat kind of in the boardrooms. There's a lot of focus. I don't think we would have heard of supply chain from our political leaders as often as we heard kind of this word in the last 2 years or so. And then the things that used to take the accelerations, the transformations that typically used to take years in supply chain, looks like many of our organizations have are doing that in a matter of weeks and months instead of taking years to transform kind of their supply chains. Let's talk about end-to-end orchestration and what does it really mean. But before I talk about kind of why we are having these challenges, let's walk through a little bit of how did we get here. It's been a long journey kind of for us to get to the stage that we are at. If all of you probably remember, kind of if I go back to 2000, right, our supply chains were mostly local. Manufacturing was local. I remember on the high-tech side, kind of at that time, the manufacturing was in US for US consumer base. Manufacturing was in Europe for the Europe consumer base. There was some outsourcing, but not a lot, right? So many of the transportation systems, technology that came out at that time was very focused on LTL and truckload, the local domestic transportation. There was a big focus on planning. Planning was always ambiguous, still is ambiguous, because it's very hard for anyone to talk about the return on the planning activities. But all of us kind of learned and knew that planning is core and critical kind of back in 2000s or so. Those of you who remember 2008, kind of the recession that happened at that time, how the inventory levels were very high across the world, especially in kind of Q4 of 2008, early 2009. But those high that recession, those high inventory levels also accelerated the focus on outsourced manufacturing. So many of our manufacturing moved to low-cost countries starting in 2008. The outsourcing of manufacturing also meant that we had a rise in international shipping. For many of our supply chains and supply chain officers, the international logistics was literally kind of a foreign concept. Right? It was hard to look at it. It was also small spend. And so I remember kind of talking to some of my peers when I was with this high-tech company about international transportation. And then the question always was that it's a smaller part of the spend on transportation. We are just going to outsource it. And we have been outsourcing kind of international transportation for the last 10 years or more now. And that trend started in 2008. By 2014, we had this new generation of consumers, actually not in terms of age, because it doesn't really matter kind of how old we are. Right? All of us got into this habit of instant gratification. We wanted to buy our products. We wanted those products to be delivered kind of in a day or two. Right? The Amazon effect, what Amazon was setting as an expectation for consumers, meant that all of us had to focus on last mile logistics and local logistics, and how do we ensure that consumers are getting the best possible experience at that time. And here we are in 2021, and then we talked about the last 2 years of challenges, where the supply chain is now part of the discussion for the CEOs and the boardrooms. The stage we have gotten to, though, is that we have logistics which is mostly outsourced. There's some focus on last mile logistics for many of the supply chains, but international logistics in particular has been outsourced. The manufacturing, there's a mixed mode. So a lot of manufacturing is outsourced. Some of the manufacturing is still in-house, depends on the company. And logistics is again a mixed bag. Many of the international logistics is outsourced, and many of the domestic logistics may be insourced. The silos between planning, logistics, manufacturing, and procurement continue to be there for many of the supply chains too. And we are at a point where all of us see the need that how do we go and remove these silos. And as we look forward to next 4 years in 2025, focus is on supply chain synchronization, supply chain orchestration, which broadly means a convergence of logistics and supply chain planning. Doesn't really mean that the procurement and manufacturing are not critical, right? But I think we understand procurement processes very well. We understand kind of manufacturing processes well, but the key for supply chain synchronization or orchestration continues to be this intersection of logistics and planning, and how these two functions need to converge, not only from technology perspective, not only from process perspective, but in many cases, even how our organizations behave and work with the silos between these two set of organizations. We will see them going away over the next few years. And we already see that behavior from some of the best run supply chains around the world. So core, before we get to that, how do I synchronize supply chain, has been how do we model our supply chains. So today I want to talk about the end-tier supply chains, but from two different perspectives. So for each of our organization, we need to be able to model kind of how our supply chain behaves. And the top here is talking about how the products are made and distributed. So we all understand kind of the multiple tiers, right? So if I'm a distributor, right, my initial tier that I'm working with will be a manufacturer, but manufacturer might be working with the component suppliers. Component suppliers may be working with the raw material suppliers. And then when it comes to visibility, right, for the last few years have taught us that just a visibility into tier one is not enough. So when we talk about the supply chain visibility, one focus on that is that how do we get visibility into our manufacturing processes, not only with the companies we deal with directly, but also the companies that are suppliers to our suppliers. But one thing that has been forgotten to some extent, that the same thing happens on logistics. If you look at a move kind of at the bottom of something that's getting manufactured in Asia and going to show up in Europe, there are many legs to that particular movement. In many cases, kind of for our supply chains, we may have one, two, or three. Think of international supply chain or a domestic supply chain. We might have a 3PL or a freight forwarder that we are using. But many of these freight forwarders are asset light. So they rely on another set of providers, which may be doing an ocean transportation like an ocean carrier, or air transportation, or trucking, or railroad, which are again kind of suppliers, another tier that is there. But even if you go to a tier where if I take ocean as an example, it may be that a freight forwarder is using a door-to-door rate from an ocean carrier. But an ocean carrier, again, kind of their focus is on kind of port-to-port move. And they're outsourcing the work of first mile or last mile execution to another set of trucking companies. And it's not just the trucking companies, there are terminals involved. Now, terminals, again, are independent companies in many cases. Right? Terminals used to be owned by ocean carriers a few years back, but today, many of these terminals are independent operators where ocean carriers are their customer. So the same concept that we have had for manufacturing, right, is the same thing applied again on logistics, that you have to think of that there are multiple tiers of logistics visibility, and how do you get closer and closer to the source of the truth. And eventually, kind of, you have to make sure that you have visibility into the person who has control of the freight at any given point in time, and that changes throughout the journey of a ship. So if as we think of the journey towards kind of supply chain synchronization, supply chain optimization, it starts off with both modeling to understand what are the tiers of suppliers that I have on manufacturing side, but also what are the tiers from logistics perspective, who is actually involved in making a move, in this particular example, from China to Europe for some of our supply chains. So if you bring back to this notion that I talked about for Blume Maps and what we have been focused on, that in the journey of a shipment, there are many locations that cargo moves through. And there are many schedules, many providers. But if I step out of it and we think from supply chain perspective, this notion of a map or predictive capability, it starts off with something as simple as when I place a purchase order, an FN procurement, how do I know the lead time? Of course, the lead time has two components. So there's a manufacturing lead time and there's a logistics lead time. And of course, manufacturing lead time again has multiple tiers, so you have to kind of build it up. But at the time of placing a purchase order, for most part, many of our supply chains rely on a single number for lead time, for the logistics lead time. The reality is that this lead time is variable. It varies by mode of transportation, it varies with cost, but it also varies with what's going on with the worldwide supply networks and transportation networks at any given point in time. Right? The lead time is different for seasonality. It's different if there's a port congestion. It's different if there is snow in Texas, which we saw earlier this year, where there was a big impact on the lead time even for our domestic transportation. And that's a perfect example. Even though kind of if I think of US, there was deep freeze in Texas, but the lead time was impacted for the parcel providers who were moving parcels from, say, Massachusetts to Florida, nowhere close to Texas. So when we think of a map, when we think of predictive capability, it starts off with that: can we get accurate about the lead time for our planning systems? Because planning systems today, majority of the systems which are out there have a fixed number for logistics lead time. How do you make it variable? For our procurement systems, could we rely on placing purchase orders when on a fixed lead time today, right? And making it variable is another key to supply chain synchronization. For our order management systems, how we commit a particular time frame, how do we kind of commit to our customers, how long will it take for their orders to get to their destination? Again, the lead time is key, and all of these lead time predictions are critical. And if you think of the science today, what has happened with the advances in machine learning, in particular kind of things like reinforcement learning and dynamic programming, all of these things are now possible, where we can get more accurate about predicting lead time before anything is moving, right? And again, kind of, as all of you know, this means that this needs to be integrated into planning, procurement, manufacturing, and are available to promise, capable to promise, or promising capabilities for order management. The second aspect for age, things change. Once we have a shipment, once we have cargo which starts moving from point A to point B, right? And we do it in our personal lives every day if you're using something like Google Maps, right? Before we start our journey, there's typically is a time that we expect to take from going from point A to point B. But things happen, traffic kind of changes, roads close, other things happen while we are driving. Now, many of our shipment journeys can take days and weeks to begin with. So traffic will change, things will change. The capability which is needed, that can we dynamically recalculate the ETA and know whether or not we are still on time. And again, it has an implication on all aspects of supply chain. From our customers' perspective, it means knowing whether or not we are going to have, depending on the organization, you may have a delivery to first commit, or it might be a OTIF, on time and full requirements. All of those are impacted kind of from dynamic ETA calculations and knowing whether or not we are staying on track. If you think from inbound supply chain perspective, right, for our factories to continue to run, knowing the lead time and being accurate and getting the deliveries done on time is critical. So the second aspect is that how do you dynamically recalculate these ETAs on an ongoing basis? The third part is actually equally critical, because many of the times we are not interested in just knowing that we are going to be late. So visibility alone is not enough. The focus is that how do I get back on time? And getting back on time is not always possible, but in 90% of the cases, it's very feasible for us to get back on time. But to get back on time, you have to look at alternative paths, alternative suppliers, alternative logistics providers. Right? And for a platform, you have to be able to get kind of these alternatives which allow you to get back on time. So some of the work we have done over the last couple of years has been in the areas of not only how do you switch mode while goods are moving, right? So you may have planned for a ocean cargo, but you may need to do air cargo. You may have planned for a rail intermodal, but you may have to do a truckload. It may be that kind of may have planned for ground parcel delivery once something comes into the destination country, but instead of doing the ground parcel, maybe it needs to be next day air, or may have to be the same day delivery network to be used, which is again the notion of how do you go find alternatives to get back on time. So if you think of kind of this notion of mapping or modeling, right? Again, there are three aspects of it. What do we do at planning time? Which is what I mean by kind of the predicting the lead time, planning, procurement, manufacturing. There's a big improvement that we can make by getting more accurate about predicting what the lead times are. Second, while things are moving, right? While we are in execution mode, things change. How soon do we know? And how do we react to those changes? And the third has been the focus on that. How do I go and find alternatives so I can be back on time? And the technology plays a key role in all three of these aspects. Just to tell you a little bit more about how we at Blume kind of solve it with our customers, it looks simple, but it's fairly complicated. So this is where the end-tier visibility on logistics comes in. Right? So if you think of an end-to-end move, and in this case, we are showing kind of an ocean move, but it could have been an air cargo move too, or it could have been kind of just a local delivery. In all of these cases, there's a route which is broken up into multiple legs. The route goes through many locations. Right? So even if you think of an LTL network has terminals. Right? So there are terminals that you're going through, and there are things that happen at these locations. Right? So example of locations are not only kind of what's going on at a manufacturing plant and what's going on at a DC. Those are the two ends, say, for a B2B move from a manufacturing location in origin country to a distribution center in the destination country. But it's also all these intermediary locations, which might be ocean terminals, which might be airports, maybe rail ramps, maybe LTL terminals, maybe the parcel hub networks. All of these are locations. Yeah? And then these locations, in many cases, there's a model of schedules. Right? So there are published schedules, but there are also intelligence on those schedules, because as all of us have probably seen in the last 2 years, the published schedules are not that accurate. I think some numbers have been for in particular for ocean schedules, the accuracy has fallen below 60% in many of the cases. On air cargo, again, the schedules have been all over the place, given kind of what has happened with the passenger planes and the space in the belly of the plane going away. And that's been the notion of schedule intelligence. And again, kind of breaking a problem down to kind of its lowest common denominator, which is kind of what are the location it's moving through, what are the schedules, how reliable are those schedules, what's the congestion or the health of a location, and what are the providers that we are really using, right? Because it may not be the provider that we work with. And again, kind of going back to my example, it might be a freight forwarder that we are working with, but there might be 15 other providers who are involved in the same movement from origin to destination that we also need to know. And these are the type of things kind of which form the foundation for it. So if I will end kind of now to talk a little bit about the blueprint of that, how do we achieve supply chain synchronization, supply chain orchestration, and what may be some of the steps that can be taken for companies to move in this direction. So how do we achieve convergence? Right? To achieve this convergence, the first part has been that not all supply chains are the same. There are portions of all of our supply chains which are in-house. Right? We manage our own factories. Even if I think of CPG industry, I think we have extremes where there are large companies which are mostly in-house, and there are many companies which are outsourced. Right? Same thing for logistics. Right? There's a mix. Right? What is in-house, what is outsourced, One of the things that I've been uh, following as a principle for ever since we started doing outsourcing, that once you outsource something, you actually need even more visibility and more management information when it is in-house. Right? Because when it's in-house, you tend to be able to see many of the things using kind of our own employees. Right? But when something is outsourced, it's kind of we kind of lose sight of it, that how things are moving. So first part of it has been that there is no single answer. It's not an answer that you have to have everything in house. It's not an answer that it's outsourced. And if it is outsourced, we can give it to someone and forget about it. Because at the end of the day, customers of supply chain or customers of the companies that have supply chain are their customers. And then customer health is dependent on how well our supply chains are executing. Second part has been the use of technology and a technology platform which allowed you to bring these things together. Over the years, the larger the supply chain, the more the number of systems which are being used, and they're typically point systems which have come across. And how do you go and build a platform which allows you to kind of bring all of these systems together? And the third one has been that it's a journey. Supply chain synchronization for even the best supply chains in the world will take months and years to happen. And so we are on a journey. On a journey, the key is focusing on what's our end state, where do we want to get to, but then implementing incrementally. So we are doing things in bite-sized chunks and moving towards kind of. I had a peer who used to call it North Star. Right? So first figuring out kind of what our true north is, right? And then making sure that incrementally we are moving towards that North Star, right? And we are doing it in bite-sized chunks, because if these things take too long, they tend to kind of lose focus to begin with. Let me show you kind of a theoretical blueprint, kind of from the systems perspective of what it could look like. And so at the foundation level, which is at the bottom, is this notion of a map of your supply chain. I talked about Blume Maps, which is a technology platform where you can overlay your own map. It's the connectivity to all type of providers, large and small. It's being able to reach those hard to find suppliers, right? Which are maybe too small from logistics perspective, too small from manufacturing perspective. So at the core of it, it is that how do you get a platform, right, to bring it together? And on top is, of course, end-to-end visibility and order management. Order management, both from customer order management perspective and supplier order management perspective. What I've seen, I think all of us have seen this need now for a few years to begin with. And sometimes we have been jumping to the conclusion that if we just had a data lake which brought all the data together from various systems I have, it will solve the problem. It actually is not necessarily the right answer for many of the organizations. Because supply chain, by definition, is a chain. It's an ecosystem. It's not the data that we have or the data that we can bring together. It's again participating in a digital platform. Right? So we of course have one, but there are others out there too, right? Which is that a platform which connects the ecosystem platform players versus something which is isolated for a single company. Most of us know that the cloud is here to stay. These ecosystems on the cloud are easier to build, easier to enable more processes, but fundamentally, it's starting off with a visibility and order management layer, which is truly end-to-end, truly includes customer order management and supplier order management. Is a good starting point. Now, in the middle, there are many systems that we all use, right? Whether we call them best of breed or it might be from a single large provider, which are the systems for sales, systems for planning, for logistics, for procurement, for manufacturing. It's not easy to replace all of these systems. So again, blueprint is that how do you keep most of these systems in place, Right? We at Blume we focus on logistics, so we have a holistic transportation management system. But there may be other transportation management systems out there, and I think today we are connected to 70 different transportation management systems that our customers use. But again, it's a focus on that you may have to relook at transportation, but many of the other systems can be part of it. But the second layer, which is critical, is this orchestration layer. Right? And then there are multiple terms that we have been using for this and bringing that together. Right? And that some people are calling sales and operations execution. Right? SNOP has been maturing now for about 10 years or so, but SNOE is still new. This concept of control tower, right? Again, redefining it, that it's focused on execution, right? And not only on visibility. It is key, and supply chain orchestration is again part of a footprint. But independent of the size of the organization, in-house or outsource, my recommendation would be that it's necessary to have a blueprint that tells you that where you are going in there, and starting off with these layers, right? Building something which is the foundation from visibility and order management perspective, but at the same time something which is doing orchestration on top, connecting all of these ecosystems together. As we go through this journey, right, when we talk about orchestration, you will always have the three aspects that we have always worked on, which is what's the technology platform, what are the processes that we have, right? So how do we have a blueprint where we are defining the processes, and then people who are managing exceptions and resolving those exceptions. The technology has come to a point where when we think of AI and machine learning and what that learning age where you can, if once you start capturing how you resolve exceptions, the systems can learn. System can learn, and we can get to more and more of an automated state for synchronizing our supply chains. So this is kind of one of the blueprints. There can be other blueprints too, but hopefully this conversation has been helpful to you. If there are more questions, I know I've connected with many of the people who are on the who are participating in the forum on a one-on-one basis, but happy to connect on a one-on-one basis. Can't talk too much about our customers because it's all of their confidential information, but happy to talk more broadly about what's going on in industry and what type of footprints are available. With that, thank you for taking time to listen to me, and hopefully we will get to meet each other in person sometime soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.